Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we're going to talk with Healthy Families consultant Alvean Lyons again about debunking some parenting myths. This is part 2, the older kids, the tweens and the teens. Welcome, Alvean.
Thanks, Robin.
Little kids are easier.
Because they do what we say.
Sort of, yeah.
Right.
But you know, much like we talked about the terrible twos, let's talk about the terrible teens. The teenagers are, awful. That's the myth.
Oh, and that's so not true. They're actually really wonderful sometimes. Well, you can have these moments. It is true. We'll acknowledge the fact that there are definitely those moments. And when we were talking about the twos and we were saying that it's the tiny teen years, it's the establishing of independence, then we get to really see it when they become teens, because now this independence looks a little different. It's not let me put my shoe on, it's let me create a life that is a world that revolves around the things that I value. And that looks very different for us, especially as we're kind of, dealing with what we would want for them versus what they may want for themselves. And those two things don't always align.
And they can be very influenced by peer pressure.
Oh, certainly.
And it isn't necessarily what they want for themselves, but they're figuring a lot of things out and they're rebelling. I mean, that's how they separate.
And they're figuring out where they fit in the world. And now understanding that their piece of the world is going to be separate from your piece of the world, that's when figuring out what that's going to look like can be very different. And us watching them go through that can be a little bit challenging because it is sometimes a challenge of the wills. What I know is right for you because I have perspective. I've lived long enough to know that this doesn't end well. So I don't want you to go down this path, but on some level they have to figure out some things safely, but they have to figure out some things on their own. Was that the right person for them to become friends with? Was this the right decision to make where classes might be concerned? Was this the right social environment for me to put myself in? Is this the kind of music I should really be listening to? Are these clothes really communicating the message I want communicated? I mean, the list goes on and on, but it really is a time where they're trying to figure out who they are in the world, but they are figuring that out inside of our homes. And that's the thing that can make that a little challenging because that doesn't always reflect what you think you have built inside of your home. But it doesn't have to be a negative experience if we understand what it's really about. Sometimes it's not about a rejection of you. It's a finding of me. And those are very different ways to look at the same experience. And we want to give proper context to that because if I feel like you're rejecting me, you're ignoring me, you're disrespecting me as a parent, how I'm going to respond to that feeling is very different than me thinking from the perspective of, oh, he's really trying to figure out who he is right now. Let me help support that process. Oh, she's really trying to figure out what it is that she wants to do with her life. Let me help guide some of that. You become a partner in the process if you understand what the process is.
Well, and you have to drop a little bit of that defensiveness too.
Right.
And it is much like the 2-year-old in how you see it. Are they challenging you?
Right.
And are you going to react defensively? Or is there a way for you to drop that and engage, in a more positive way?
And that's such a perfect way to say it because it really is. I have to, on some level as a parent, sometimes we have to drop our personal agenda in order to pick up our child's agenda. That doesn't mean a compromising in values. I'm not telling you to change your values at all. I am saying how you go about establishing, supporting, guiding, increasing those values where your child is concerned. When they hit those teen years, it's not the same thing as I tell you and you do it. It is really more about the understanding. They need to understand why. If you can answer the why question for your teens, you have won more than half of the battle already. Because if they get it, it's much easier for them to apply it again, independent of you, because it makes sense. I get why it's important for me to actually study. I understand that there's a life that I dream of, that if I don't do these things, I won't have that life. Not the life my mom wants for me or my dad wants for me, but the life I want for myself. When you can put those pieces together, it's a little bit less challenging when you're telling them you're going to have to shut down, all of your social media and you need to study. Why, Mom? Remember you said you wanted to go to such and such school or join such and such program or have such and such opportunity? Babe, they're not taking kids less than 3.0. So here's what it is that we're going to have to do. This
Right.
is for the life you want for you. Mommy's just trying to make sure it happens. You know, so it's really how we approach it really changes those teen experiences.
Right. I would say sometimes, you're going to have to pay for that cell phone soon. And you're going to need a job that allows you to pay for the
Absolutely.
social media you're playing on right
Absolutely.
now.
I tell my son when he's picking up the dog
Bottom
stuff,
line.
I'm like, look, if you don't want to do this for the rest of your life, you might want an education.
Well, sort of similar along those lines, there's a myth, or some people might say a truth, that teenagers really only care about themselves. They
Right.
don't care what you think. They don't care about your feelings. They're just, and the truth piece of that is it's a pretty self-absorbed time.
It is a self-absorbed time, but they do care.
They may not show it.
They don't always show it. That's exactly what it is. See, sometimes we misinterpret some things, especially if we're not listening and watching closely. Because what's interesting about our teens is they drop little clues like breadcrumbs on a regular basis that really gives you some idea of where they are. But when you're too busy or too focused on winning, you will miss those breadcrumbs. So while it is true that it's a self-absorbed time, it's self-absorbed because I'm figuring out who I am. I already know who you are, Mom, and I already know who you may be, Dad.
Or I think I do.
Or I think I do. Like I'm pretty sure on my insides that I've figured you out. Now I'm trying to figure me out relative to the rest of the world. So when that's going on, it is true that I am focused a little bit more inward, but it doesn't mean that I don't care what you think about me, because we have to consider the fact that our kids often see themselves through two primary lenses: what's reflected to them through us and what's reflected to them through their peers. So it matters how we see them, because how we see them often affects what they allow to be reflected back to them where their peers are concerned. So when you build your kids' self-confidence by virtue of the things that you say about them, I mean, let's think about it. Many of us grew up and we heard 100 times, oh, you're not pretty enough, oh, you're not this, oh, you're not that. And as adults, we can look back and realize how much that affected the way we thought about ourselves. Because when you hear things often enough, you begin to believe them. Well, the same thing works in the reverse. If you're hearing positive things often enough, your default place, maybe not your primary, but your default is a positive place. We want to make sure that that is the reflection that our kids see of themselves in dealing with us. So it does matter, because if they think well of themselves, they will not allow other people to treat them badly, because that's not the them that they know. So it really is important that we're aware that they are, in fact, not so absorbed that they can't hear, feel, respond to what it is that we're putting in. They do care. They just don't want to tell you.
They don't want to admit
that
it.
they
Exactly.
care.
So you have to
Absolutely.
keep saying things even when
You think they're not.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
Absolutely. So don't give up on that at all. Those are important years, and they are still spongy years. But it's just that you can't tell that the sponge is still filling up. But it still is taking things in.
Well, this is an interesting myth. What about the myth that kids don't want rules? They want the freedom to do it all themselves and figure it all out when they're teenagers.
So not true.
They think they want it.
They think they want it. And what's interesting is that kids actually process love in terms of boundaries. Even though they don't communicate it that way, part of them testing those boundaries is to see where your love lines are. I want to know what you're willing to allow to happen. Parents who are disciplined without stifling. Now, there's a gentle balance. There is a place where you can over control. You refer to it as helicopter parenting. You're just hovering over your kid all the time. Everything they do, you want to control. The kids will naturally rebel against that because it is stifling. That's a little intense. That would be intense for us as adults. So imagine little versions of that, just trying to spread their wings. That's tough. So in that balance space in between, they do want to know that you care enough about them to want to keep them safe. You want to know what's going on in their life. You want to make sure that they're okay. You want to make sure that there are appropriate, adults, authority, parents around for such and such event. And they will fuss about it because that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to challenge the walls to see how far the walls go. But our job as parents is to be concrete where that is concerned. We don't go over to people's houses if parents aren't home. I don't care. You're not going. There's too many opportunities for things to go wrong, and there's not an adult to be able to manage it. We check to make sure parents are going to be there if there's a party. We make sure that you're home at an appropriate time when you go to an event. Half of the ways that we keep our kids safe in our communities is knowing where they are, who they're with, what they're doing, why are you going, how are you planning on getting home. All of those important questions consider them to be walls of love. And those kinds of things, kids over time, you may not hear it when they're 13, you may not hear it when they're 15, but over time, you will recognize that your kids actually appreciate that and they like consistency.
Well, and I always found, it changed a little. Like when they can't drive and when their friends can't drive, you have so much more control.
It's
and
true.
You tend to know those parents. Like up through middle school, your kids go to school with a lot of the same kids.
Right.
And then in high school, there's a bunch of kids you don't know,
Absolutely.
parents you don't know.
Absolutely.
They're not all at the PTA. They're not all, at whatever clubs and organizations, they do get a little farther apart. And you have to figure out how to let the walls move a little without breaking them down.
And your principles have to remain concrete. Those things do. How you display those things may be a little bit more flexible. So principally, it's important for me to know that you're safe. It's important for me to know that the appropriate things are going on in the places that you are. How I may go about doing that may look a little bit different, but the principle shouldn't change. So I'll admit to you, I'm one of those parents that I don't care how old my kids are, and they're now in their 20s. I want to know that a parent is home. If I don't talk to a parent, they can come here, but you cannot go there if I don't know. If we have no history with that family, period, there's no way. And my kids now grown are like, thank you.
Really?
Yes, because they now see, they can look now. You have a long enough spectrum to be able to look to see how kids who didn't have that turned out versus the kids that did. And there is a real difference between those two spaces. So nothing's perfect, but when we want to keep our kids safe and we want to make sure that our kids are really their best selves, it requires that there are boundaries, and our kids actually appreciate them. So don't be afraid to be a full parent. It really is okay.
Okay, last myth. It doesn't matter what you say because teenagers don't listen anyway.
They are listening almost all the time. What is so interesting, I have a 15-year-old son, so boys are very different than your girls. And I can't tell you how many times he has repeated something back to me that he heard my husband and I having a conversation about, that I had no idea.
Oh, well, they listen when you're not talking to them.
And here's the thing about that. You can use that to your benefit.
Oh, sneaky.
You understand what I'm saying? So because they are listening, and they tend to listen when it's not directed at them, have conversation around them about the things you want to say to them, and they hear you even better then. Because it doesn't feel like it's personal. They are just hearing the conversation taking place. So when you're saying things like, it's so important that, you've got kids that actually talk to their parents because, gosh, I was just reading something the other day and kid was hiding stuff from their parents and such happened and it was just horrible. And I really, hey, babe, you're talking to your partner. Hey, babe, I hope our kids are sharing stuff with us. But it sounds like it's just the conversation between you and your partner, you and your spouse.
That is
but
so
your
sneaky.
kid is hearing that conversation. So it plants seeds, and kids are always picking up seeds. They are sponges. So sometimes it is a direct conversation, and they will remember the voices. They replay like a song stuck in your head. They'll remember some of the things that you said directly to them. But they also pick up a lot of the subconscious conversation, a lot of the latent conversation that you're talking in the car and you think they're in the back sleeping and they're listening. All of those things can be great opportunities because your kids do pull those things back up as they're processing their own worlds.
I think that's why you have to do some of the more difficult conversations in little snippets and over time. Because I do know with my kids, if I would sit down and say, I need to talk to you now, they're would be like, whoo, this is going to be bad.
Right.
I'm not listening. What is she going to say?
Going up,
I mean, I'm just like panicking. And they really didn't listen because they weren't able to relax and hear it. So sometimes as the conversation went on, they could hear it. Sometimes I wrote little notes, especially with a child who's a different gender than you are. It's very hard to of conversations
It can be.
about sexuality and things, and they don't want to hear it. So books, it would be little notes. I mean, you have to sort of break down that wall to get them to listen sometimes.
You're kind of peeling back the onion one layer at a time, but you never stop peeling. You know, you have to go through the process. Don't shortcut the process. Allow it to happen, but do understand that they are, in fact, listening. And there's so much that we can teach them. But when we're having a tough time with that, know that you have resources available. I mean, we've got Building Better Relationship classes that are fantastic at Healthy Families between partners. We have great things in terms of strengthening families that take care of it at the partner level and take care of it at the child level and bring those things together. We have nurturing classes when our kids are really small. I mean, the list goes on and on. When it's tough, let's work through those things with someone who can help us do that.
Well, and something you always say, if you are not with your partner,
Right.
It becomes much harder.
Right.
And teenagers see that,
Oh,
and they will work
absolutely.
those angles. They'll know who to go to.
They
know
are
how.
brilliant.
Yeah.
They are. Their instincts are better than the CIA. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yep.
It's true. But making sure that we have those healthy relationships, both the ones at the top horizontally and then the vertical relationships, ours with our kids, those two things are vital to a strong family. But there's so many things that don't have to be the way that people talk about them, especially if we do something in between to ensure that we get the outcomes that we want.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize by saying that the teens aren't that terrible.
They're not.
and they're listening and they care, even though they will tell you that that's
Absolutely.
not the case.
And they will push those boundaries, not because they don't love you, but because they're figuring out how much you love them.
And they're growing.
Absolutely.
You gotta let them learn. They can't turn 18 and be suddenly on their own. You've got to
Right.
do a gradual preparation for
Absolutely.
that time.
So you can launch them healthy.
That's
Indeed.
right.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Robin.
And thank you for watching. I hope you've learned a little bit about the myths and the positive aspects of parenting teenagers and tweenagers. Thanks for watching.